Welcome back, travelers of the void. Tonight's story begins with a scream of failing gravity and a classroom torn open by vacuum. An intergalactic exchange meant for learning becomes a fight for survival when a dying station forces humans and aliens to choose who they are under pressure. This is not just a tale of danger in space. It is about stubborn courage, impossible choices, and the cost of staying together. Stay with us, and let the stars test what truly makes a species strong. Gravity hit the xenobiology classroom like a judge's gavel. One moment the habitat's floor held, the next it lurched. Stole weight. Then returned, it doubled, slamming desks, tentacles, and containment rigs into metal. Red strobes ignited, turning every face, fungal, insectoid, gelatinous, into a flickering mask of panic. Professor Vrax Telmore whipped a tentacle across the emergency panel. But the alarms arrived late, a rising howl that rattled teeth and chitin. Along the corridor window, frost bloomed where air began to thin, and a hairline seam in the bulkhead widened with a soft, murderous hiss. Students clung, deflated or sporulated, instincts misfiring under unstable physics. Vrax planted himself between the class and the ceiling hatch, eye stalks sweeping for casualties. Then the door slid open, and an unarmored human girl stepped in on shaking knees, breathing like every second mattered, because it did. Vrax's voice cut through the chaos. Move. Breathe and hold on. Hold. The door sealed behind her with a violent hiss, and the classroom bucked again as gravity snapped sideways. Emily Carter staggered, palms slamming against cold alloy, lungs dragging thin air that tasted metallic and wrong. She had expected awkward introductions, not flashing hazard glyphs and a pressure alarm climbing toward red. A containment field beside her flickered, its gelatinous occupant shuddering as sparks crawled along the rim. Spores drifted like glittering smoke, beautiful and lethal in the same breath. Professor Vrax Telmore seized a manual crank. Tentacles straining to lock the inner bulkhead before the corridor became a vacuum throat. Emily didn't freeze. She tore open the emergency kit, fingers clumsy but determined, and shoved a sealant plate over a widening seam. The hull screamed under another impact. No one announced her arrival. The station did that for her, in firelight and failing gravity. The siren changed pitch, climbing from warning to accusation, and every mind in the room felt it. Vrax forced the holographic schematic alive through flickering power, red fractures spidering across the station ring. "Survival is not anatomy," he said over the howl, voice stripped of lecture and left with truth. "It is choice." A fresh tremor rattled the ceiling. Dust spiraled in unstable gravity, drifting like slow snow. Beyond the sealed hatch, pressure indicators bled downward. Some students folded inward, instincts urging them to hide. Harden. Defend. Emily's hands shook around the sealant gun, but she stayed upright, breath steady by will alone. "Empathy is not decoration," Vrax continued, eye stalks sweeping the room. "It is protocol." The words landed heavier than the gravity spikes. Outside, another impact rang through the hull. Inside, they faced a question sharper than vacuum: save themselves or save each other. A sound like fabric tearing underwater rippled through the corridor wall. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. Frost blossomed along a seam no wider than a thread, spreading in white veins as warm air kissed vacuum. The pressure gauge dipped another notch, Emily felt it before she understood it. A tug at her lungs. A thinness stealing strength from each breath. Professor Vrax snapped toward the breach, tentacles flashing across the emergency console. But the hull had already begun to whisper its surrender. The crack widened, metal bowing outward as if something invisible were pulling from the other side. A containment field flared bright blue, then dimmed, its occupant quivering violently. KX released a burst of involuntary spores that shimmered in the red light. "Seal it!" Vrax barked. Emily lunged for the clamp plate, heart hammering against ribs that suddenly felt far too fragile for space. Emily slammed the clamp plate over the widening crack and felt the hull fight back. Air screamed around the edges, cold and vicious, trying to peel the metal away from her hands. She braced her shoulder against it, boots sliding as gravity flickered between mercy and cruelty. "Hold it!" Vrax ordered, tentacles locking onto wall grips to steady them both. Emily grabbed the expanding foam canister with numb fingers and fired it into the seam. White sealant blossomed, hissing as it met vacuum, hardening in jagged ridges that clawed at the tear. The plate vibrated violently, threatening to rip free. Pain lanced through her arm, but she leaned harder, teeth clenched, breath ragged. She had no armor, no claws, only stubborn muscle and the refusal to let go. The hiss softened, not gone, but weaker. For a moment, that was enough. A weak life sign pulsed on the schematic beyond the corridor bend, faint and stuttering like a dying signal flare. Someone was trapped out there. The sealed hatch groaned under pressure, frost thick along its edges. "If we open, we lose more air." Zerak clicked sharply. "If we don't," Gloop whispered, "they die." The station shuddered again, gravity surging enough to knock smaller bodies from their grips. Emily stared at the hatch wheel, feeling the thin air scrape her lungs raw. Earth had taught her storms took what they wanted. Space was no different. Vrax's eye stalks fixed on her, not asking permission, but measuring resolve. "Empathy is protocol," he said quietly. The timer on the pressure gauge dipped another fraction. Emily nodded once, jaw tight. "We open!" Vrax hauled the lever. The hatch cracked. Air screamed into the void, and Emily moved toward it. The corridor beyond the hatch was a frost-lined throat, lights flickering like dying stars. Air tore past Emily's ears in a thin, relentless scream as pressure bled into vacuum. Ahead, a small figure lay twisted beneath a fallen brace, harness snagged, limbs trembling. No time to identify species. Alive was enough. Emily dropped low and crawled, fingers slipping on ice-cold metal, lungs burning with every shallow inhale. Gravity lurched, trying to peel her backward, but she hooked an arm beneath the trapped student and pulled. The body was lighter than she expected, fragile, brittle. Another tremor slammed through the hull. Vrax anchored behind her, tentacles wrapping both of them for leverage. "Move," he rasped. Emily gritted her teeth and dragged, boots scraping sparks. The hatch loomed ahead. The air screamed louder. She did not let go. They tumbled back through the hatch just as Vrax slammed it shut, the seal biting down on the screaming air. The rescued student lay trembling but alive. Thin breaths fogging in unstable gravity. The room's pressure stabilized to survivable. Not safe. Vrax projected the station schematic again. Red fractures bloomed across the ring like spreading infection. Radiation indicators crept upward. "This habitat is failing in multiple sectors," he said, voice stripped of ceremony. "Staying means slow death." The words hung heavier than the flickering gravity. Zerak's mandibles clicked in grim calculation. KX's spores quivered, but remained contained. Emily wiped frost from her brow, forcing her breathing steady. "Then we move," she said. Not bravado. Decision. Vrax nodded once. "Maintenance arteries to secondary bay C. Gather what you can carry." No more classroom. No more lecture. New rule. Move, or be erased. The maintenance hatch swallowed them into a narrow artery of cables and dust. Emily crawled first, headlamp slicing a thin path through floating debris as gravity hiccuped between weightless drift and bone-crushing pull. Behind her, Gloop's gelatinous form quivered with barely restrained panic, and KX's spores pressed against the filter hood like rain against glass. "Slow," Emily said, keeping her voice even, despite the thin air rasping in her chest. "In, out, we stay together." A tremor rippled through the tunnel. Somewhere distant. Metal shrieked under stress. Gloop nearly surged forward in fear. Then it steadied at Emily's measured breathing. KX's spore pulses calmed, light dimming to a soft glow. Trust formed not from speeches, but from rhythm. Shared breaths. Shared motion. Vrax followed close behind, watching the human anchor alien fear with stubborn composure. In the dark, survival became collective. Blitblop's containment unit began to hum off-key. A sick tremor beneath the steady throb of the tunnel. The field shimmered thin, edges rippling like heat over sand. Inside, the gelatinous body convulsed, surface dimming with every fluctuation. "Field stability dropping," Zerak clicked, mandibles sharp with alarm. The corridor jolted again, gravity dragging everyone hard against the metal before easing without apology. Emily swung the case onto her knees and popped the panel open. Coils, regulators, alien glyphs she didn't understand. Only patterns of input and output. "Power drain from earlier patches," Vrax warned, tentacles bracing the ceiling. The hum stuttered lower. Emily grabbed a spare capacitor, jammed leads into place with shaking fingers, and bridged the gap with conductive tape. Sparks snapped, blue and vicious. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the field flared brighter, stabilizing. Blitblop's trembling slowed. A thin blue vapor curled along the tunnel floor, luminous and deceptively beautiful. It seeped from a ruptured conduit ahead, drifting in lazy spirals whenever gravity flickered. Emily's visor alarm chimed softly. Filtration increased, but the sweetness of the smell still reached her through the mask. "Do not inhale," Vrax warned, voice tight. "Reactive compound." Zerak skirted the edges with careful steps, mandibles twitching in calculation. KX's spores shuddered inside the hood, pulsing anxiously at the color. The corridor shivered again, stirring the vapor into a low cloud that clung to the walls. Emily crouched, scanning for stable footholds, choosing every step as if the floor itself were judging her. She found a water pouch clipped to the wall, instinctively lifting it toward her mouth before Vrax snapped. "Check first." She froze, chastened. Survival demanded attention, not assumption. The tunnel began to sing, a low metallic moan that vibrated through boots, carapaces, and gelatinous membranes alike. It was not a sound meant for ears. It was stress translated into warning. Dust spiraled in uneven gravity. drifting sideways as if confused about direction. Emily paused, palm flat against the wall, feeling the tremor travel through her bones. Vrax did the same. Tentacles splayed, reading the vibration like a pulse beneath skin. Structural strain increasing, Zerak murmured, mandibles clicking in uneasy rhythm. The habitat felt less like a building and more like a wounded animal refusing to collapse. Another distant impact rippled through the ring, followed by a shudder that rattled loose screws into the dark. KX's spores dimmed instinctively. Emily swallowed the dryness in her throat. The station was telling them something simple and merciless. Hurry. The wheel to secondary Bay C resisted like a stubborn vault. Then, finally, turned under Emily's straining grip. The door slid aside, releasing a breath of stale, unmoving air. No hum of regulators greeted them. No reassuring vibration beneath their feet. The bay lay dark, consoles dead, indicator panels blank as unblinking eyes. Gravity flickered weakly, barely holding them to the floor. Vrax moved quickly to the main terminal, tentacles dancing over inert controls. Nothing responded. "Power spine severed," he said. Voice clipped. The red fractures on the schematic spread wider, and radiation warnings ticked upward in quiet increments. Gloop's form tightened in fear. KX's spores pulsed dimly. Emily stepped inside anyway, scanning the silent machinery. Safety had been a rumor, not a destination. She exhaled slowly. "Then we build it," she said, already reaching for tools. A backup monitor flickered to life on emergency cells, its glow sickly against the dark bay. Lines of diagnostic text crawled upward, then froze on a single warning that tightened every throat in the room. Gravity core, thermal runaway, cascade, failure, imminent. A countdown appeared beneath it, numbers slipping away with mechanical indifference. The station shuddered again, deeper this time, like a heart misfiring inside metal ribs. Vrax stared at the readout, eye stalks narrowing. If the core ruptures, the ring fractures, pressure loss becomes total. Zerak's mandibles clicked sharply, calculating outcomes that all ended the same way. Emily felt the weight of the words settle heavier than gravity. They hadn't escaped the disaster. They had only stepped closer to its center. She looked toward the maintenance map, pulse hammering. "Then we stop the heart from exploding," she said. Vrax projected the route to the gravity core, a thin thread of corridors ending at an exterior maintenance crawl. "Internal access is unstable," he said. "Outside is worse." Radiation levels blinked in warning, and debris trajectories traced lethal arcs across the hull. Zerak's mandibles clicked rapidly. "We cannot all go." Gloop swirled closer, sealing a small leak along the bay wall with trembling resolve. KX's spores brightened faintly. "We can reinforce atmosphere here. Build a temporary bubble." Blip-Blop's containment field hummed, steadier now. "I can stabilize regulators," the gelatinous voice offered. Strained but determined. Emily scanned the schematic, mapping distances against oxygen reserves. "You build the bubble," she said, meeting Vrax's gaze. "We reach the core and vent it." Silence hung for a breath. Then Vrax nodded once. Human hands, alien minds, one chance. Radiation climbed from warning to threat, ticking upward with calm indifference. The tunnel ahead pulsed with erratic gravity, dragging at limbs, then releasing without pattern. Metal groaned as if the station were chewing its own bones. Emily felt the pressure inside her skull, a dull throb behind her eyes, each breath scraping thin against her lungs. Vrax's tentacles trembled, dehydration slowing their precision. Yet he kept moving. Zirak's hive link crackled. Too many minds feeding fear back into itself. KX's spores rattled inside the hood, nearly bursting under stress. A cold draft kissed the corridor, vacuum sneaking through unseen fractures. "Focus," Vrax ordered, voice tight. "Fear wastes oxygen." Another violent jolt slammed them against the wall. The habitat was no longer just damaged. It was hunting weakness, and weakness in space. Never stayed hidden long. The access hatch to the gravity core stood before them, striped in hazard yellow. Promise and threat in one. Vrax seized the wheel and twisted. It groaned, moved a fraction, then locked solid. Another tremor ripped through the corridor, and a gravity spike slammed everyone flat. A support brace snapped loose overhead and crashed down, pinning the rescued student beneath cold metal. The life sign monitor spiked, then faltered. Emily lunged for the pry bar, wedging it beneath the brace, muscles screaming as she pushed. It barely shifted. Zirak tried to help, mandibles scraping uselessly against steel. The hatch remained sealed, immovable. The timer on the core continued its merciless countdown. Emily's arms trembled with effort and dread. The station did not care who was trapped. It only counted seconds, and they were almost gone. The brace refused to move, and the hatch refused to open. The timer on the gravity core kept counting down with mechanical patience. The pinned student's breathing stuttered, shallow and uneven beneath the weight. Emily's hands shook on the pry bar, strength draining with every second. Vrax's eye stalks dimmed. "If we stay, we lose everyone," he said quietly. The words were not cruel, only factual. Zirak fell silent, calculations collapsing into grief. For a moment the corridor held nothing but alarms and the thin rasp of failing lungs. Emily felt something inside her fracture. Not bone, not muscle, but certainty. Earth had storms that took without apology. Space did the same. She met Vrax's gaze, pain blazing behind stubborn resolve. "We don't stop," she whispered. It was not heartless. It was survival choosing its price. The exterior hatch yawned open, revealing a field of cold stars and drifting debris. Emily clipped her tether to the hull ring, magnet boots locking with a hard metallic snap. The silence beyond the threshold felt enormous, broken only by the faint crackle of her suit's warnings. Radiation indicators blinked amber. Oxygen margins slid lower. Vrax followed, tentacles anchoring awkwardly to grips designed for hands. The station's curved surface gleamed beneath them, scarred by fresh impacts and frozen fractures. A distant shard drifted past, turning lazily until a gravity pulse tugged it closer. Emily lowered herself to the hull and began crawling, keeping her center of mass tight. Movements deliberate. Each breath fogged her visor before filtration cleared it. There was no applause, no lecture, only vacuum and a failing heart of metal waiting ahead. A gravity pulse struck without warning, dragging at their bodies as if the core were trying to claim them early. Emily's tether snapped tight, jerking her sideways. Magnet boots screeched against the hull plating, but held. A shard of debris, small and silent, whipped past her visor and slammed into the metal ahead with a sharp metallic crack. Fragments burst outward in slow, glittering arcs. Vrax flattened himself against the surface, tentacles clinging desperately to anchor points. Radiation warnings ticked higher. Orange, edging toward red. Emily forced herself forward, inch by inch, palms scraping against cold alloy. The core access marker glowed faintly ahead through drifting particles. Another pulse rippled through the ring, twisting their bodies toward the gravity well. She gritted her teeth and kept crawling. Space did not argue. It only punished hesitation. The core access panel screamed when Emily forced it open, heat breathing out in a violent shimmer. Inside, cables glowed a feverish orange, coolant lines trembling under pressure. The gravity core pulsed unevenly, a dying heart trapped in metal ribs. Vrax slid inside first, tentacles moving with strained precision, tracing power pathways through a maze of failing circuits. "Thermal runaway accelerating," he warned. Emily grabbed the emergency vent wheel, rust biting into her gloves. It refused to turn. Another gravity pulse slammed through the hull, nearly tearing her loose from her brace. She planted her boots, wrapped both hands around the wheel, and heaved with everything her body had left. Pain flashed white across her vision. The valve groaned, then shifted. Superheated vapor roared into the vent line. The temperature readings dipped, barely, but enough. They dropped back through the exterior hatch as it sealed with a grinding finality, the thin air inside feeling almost generous after vacuum. Emily's legs trembled when gravity reasserted itself, heavier now, bruising every muscle she had abused. Vrax steadied himself against the bulkhead, tentacles slack with exhaustion. Secondary Bay C shimmered ahead, the makeshift atmosphere bubble flickering like a candle in draft. Inside it, shapes huddled close, gloop sealing a seam with trembling resolve. Zarak bent over a regulator, KX dimly glowing under strain. Blit Blop's containment field hummed weak but steady, its tone thinner than before. Radiation warnings still blinked along the wall, stubborn and accusing. Emily stumbled forward, visor clearing as she unsealed her helmet. The air smelled metallic, tired. "Cores vented," she rasped. "For now." The station answered with a low, uneasy groan. A sharp new alarm sliced through the bay, different from the gravity warnings. Colder. The wall display flared. Radiation shield array. Partial failure. The atmosphere bubble shimmered violently, edges fraying like torn fabric. Blit Blop's containment field flickered in sympathy, its hum breaking into uneven pulses. Zarak's mandibles clicked in alarm, while Gloop pressed harder against a leaking seam, body thinning under strain. Emily staggered toward the stabilizer case, fingers clumsy as she swapped out a capacitor already warm from overload. Radiation levels crept upward, invisible but relentless. Vrax's tentacles hovered, ready to steady her, unable to fix what numbers dictated. The pinned student's life sign monitor dimmed another fraction. The station might survive the core, but the aftermath was claiming them anyway. Emily swallowed, tasting iron, and forced the connections tight. Emily's knees buckled without ceremony, the tool slipping from her grip and clattering across the floor. The bubble held, but her body did not. Radiation exposure, thin air, and exhaustion carved through her at once, leaving her vision grainy and unstable. Vrax caught her before she struck the metal, tentacles bracing her shoulders with uncharacteristic urgency. Her pulse fluttered fast beneath pale skin. She tried to speak and coughed instead, breath shallow and uneven. Around them, the regulators hummed weakly, stubborn machines refusing surrender. Zarak stood frozen, calculations useless against flesh. Gloop tightened the nearest seam. Silent, Emily forced her eyes open, meeting Vrax's gaze through pain. "Still here," she whispered, a fragile claim rather than confidence. Blood traced faintly from a split lip she hadn't noticed before. Survival was no legend now. It was damage carried forward. The pinned student's life sign flickered once more, then steadied into a faint, fragile rhythm. The brace still pressed against them, but Blitblop's weakened field bore most of the weight now, shimmering with strain. Emily pushed herself upright despite the dizziness, moving to the fallen figure. Frost still clung to their outer layer, tiny fractures spidering along a surface never meant for such pressure. Zarak crouched beside her, mandibles slowing into something like reverence. Gloop sealed the harness gently, keeping the student aligned and breathing. Another tremor rippled through the hull, but the brace held under the containment field's glow. The monitor dipped again, lower than before. Emily felt the truth settle heavy and cold. Not every rescue lasted. She placed a steadying hand on the harness. Silent. The station hummed on, indifferent to loss. Docking signals echoed faintly through the battered ring. Rescue craft approaching with cautious precision. Inside Secondary Base C, the atmosphere bubble shimmered, fragile but intact. The pinned student's monitor had gone quiet minutes earlier, leaving an absence heavier than gravity. No one spoke of it. KX's spores pulsed once, then settled into a steady glow, without a cue. Zarak tapped a rhythm against the floor plating, mandibles clicking in sync. Gloop echoed the beat with soft impacts against the bubble's edge. It was not celebration. It was defiance. Emily managed to sit upright, back against the wall, and tapped her fingers weakly to the rhythm. Blitblop's field hummed along. Thin, but present. The improvised cadence grew, awkward and uneven, yet undeniably alive. The station still groaned, but inside the bay, they chose noise over silence. The rescue shuttle sealed against the docking collar with a solid metallic thud, vibration rolling through the bay like distant thunder. A new voice cut into their comms, calm and efficient, confirming stabilization teams en route and full evacuation protocols active. Vrax straightened despite fatigue, eye stalks lifting toward the sound. "This habitat is no longer viable," the transmission continued. "All exchange programs suspended pending review." The words settled heavier than radiation. Emily felt something twist beneath the exhaustion. Suspended. After everything. Zarak lowered his head. KX's spores dimmed, uncertain. The shuttle's inner hatch cycled open, bright, sterile light spilling across battered metal. Vrax glanced at Emily, measuring her reaction. She pushed herself to her feet, unsteady but upright. Survival had a cost. So did connection. The announcement changed the future, but not what they had learned. Weeks later, the classroom lights flickered back to life, softer but steady. New plating sealed old fractures along the walls, patches visible like scars left deliberately unpainted. The gravity hum was stable, though no one forgot how it had once betrayed them. Desks were rearranged closer together, practical rather than ceremonial. Blitblop's containment unit rested against a reinforced bracket. Zarak's antennae twitched at every minor vibration, still listening for danger. KX's spores glowed brighter now, filtered but unashamed. Vrax stood at the front, eye stalks sweeping across faces that had endured vacuum and loss. One seat remained empty. No name was spoken. Emily sat among them. a faint scar at her lip catching the light. The classroom felt smaller, quieter, but stronger. It was no longer a place for lectures alone. It was proof they had survived together. Vrax did not activate a hologram this time. He let the patched walls speak. Humans, he began quietly, were once classified by danger. His eye stalks shifted toward Emily, then across the room. But classification is incomplete without context. Zarak's mandibles clicked softly in agreement. KX's spores pulsed in steady light. Emily folded her hands, listening rather than defending. Survival, Vrax continued, is not merely enduring hostile environments. It is choosing action when retreat is logical. It is accepting loss without surrendering connection. The empty seat seemed to absorb the words. Blit Blop's containment field hummed at a stronger frequency now, stabilized by collective effort. The lesson was no longer theoretical. The station had tested them all. Humanity's defining trait was not recklessness. It was the refusal to abandon one another when survival demanded a price. The classroom doors slid open once more, revealing 5 new silhouettes against the corridor lights. Different shapes, different atmospheres, different histories etched into armor and skin. They stepped inside cautiously, eyes adjusting to patched walls and visible scars left unrepaired on purpose. Emily watched from her seat, fingers tracing the faint line at her lip. Vrax inclined his eye stalks in greeting, voice steady but tempered by memory. Zarak's mandibles clicked in measured curiosity. KX's spores brightened, restrained but welcoming. Blit Blop's containment field hummed at a confident pitch. The empty seat remained, not as warning, but reminder. The station no longer pretended safety was guaranteed. It offered something harder, shared risk. The newcomers glanced at one another, uncertain. Emily gave a small nod. Survival had cost them. Connection had rebuilt them. The lesson would begin again. In the end, the station was patched, but the scars remained, on metal and on memory. They learned that survival is not simply breathing another day. It is deciding who you refuse to abandon when everything breaks. Humanity's strength was never gravity or grit, Ellen, but connection. If this journey moved you, follow the channel and join us for more cinematic survival stories among the stars. The universe is vast, and we are only beginning